The piercing wail of sirens sliced through the night, louder than the waves crashing against the dock where I stood, my heart pounding like a drum. Flashing red and blue lights danced across the lake's surface, turning the water into a mosaic of shattered glass. There, in the glow of the Coast Guard boat's spotlight, my stolen yacht bobbed, surrounded with two figures thrashing on its deck, Linda and Nancy, the infamous Karen sisters. They waved their arms wildly, shouting as if their theatrics could rewrite their crime. They'd swiped my yacht for what they called a quick joyride, but now they were trapped, looking every bit like the thieves they were. I caught Linda jabbing a finger toward my lakeside cabin, her voice shrill as she tried to spin some excuse to the stone-faced Coast Guard officers. But they weren't buying it. With swift, no-nonsense precision, the officers stormed aboard, their commands cutting through the chaos like a blade. The sisters' protests, "It's a misunderstanding. We're just neighbors," were swallowed by the growl of the boat's engine. I'd made one call, backed by ironclad evidence of their theft, and now the law was closing in. As the officers slapped handcuffs on them and hauled them onto the Coast Guard vessel, Linda twisted around, her eyes blazing, and shrieked, "You'll regret this, we were just borrowing it." I let out a bitter chuckle under my breath. Borrowing. They'd smashed my locks, snatched my keys, and tried to sail my pride and joy like it was theirs for the taking. This wasn't borrowing, this was grand theft, and they were about to learn the cost. As the sirens faded into the distance, I stood on the dock, adrenaline still coursing through me, my hands trembling. How had my serene lake cabin life spiraled into this chaos, with neighbors carted off in cuffs? Let me take you back to where this nightmare kicked off. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with an HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. It didn't start with sirens and arrests. It started with me moving into my dream lake cabin, thinking I had found a piece of heaven. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because I love seeing where my audience is tuning in from. My name is Mark, a retired Navy veteran who wanted a quiet life by the water. I bought this lake cabin 2 years ago with my hard-earned savings. The view was perfect, the neighbors seemed nice, and the HOA, well, at first they seemed harmless enough. But things changed when I met Linda and Nancy, the self-proclaimed queens of the neighborhood. Linda, the older sister, always had this smug smile like she owned the whole lake. Nancy, the younger one, was her shadow, copying everything she said and did. They weren't just regular neighbors. They were the type who thought HOA rules gave them power over everyone else. They believed they could control where you parked, how your lawn looked, and even how loud you played music on weekends. At first, I stayed polite. I waved when I saw them, kept my property clean, and didn't cause trouble. But they had this habit of pushing boundaries. They would walk into my yard without asking, peek into my boathouse, and make snide comments about my fishing trips. "It must be nice having all these boats," Linda said one day, her arms crossed. "Most of us can only dream." I laughed it off. Well, I worked hard for them. They're my pride and joy. What I didn't know was that their envy was growing like weeds. Things stayed calm for a while, but every time I took my boat out, they watched me like hawks. They even hinted a few times that they wanted to try it out. I politely said no. I wasn't about to let anyone without experience take my boat onto the unpredictable lake, but they didn't like being told no. One sunny afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and noticed the padlock on my boathouse looked tampered with. My gut twisted. I rushed inside and saw everything in place, so I brushed it off as me being paranoid. I didn't know then that it was their first attempt. Days passed and then the HOA started sending me ridiculous complaints. "Your boat cover is too bright. You're parking the trailer too close to the sidewalk." Clearly, Linda and Nancy were behind it. They were on the HOA board. They thought they could bully me into submission, but I ignored them. I stayed calm. Then came that stormy night. The night had all escalated. I had just settled down with a cup of coffee when I heard my boat house alarm go off. My heart pounded as I ran to the window and saw two shadows moving around my dock. The rain was pouring and the wind howled, but I could see them. Linda and Nancy, dressed in raincoats, struggling to untie my boat. I grabbed my phone and called the Coast Guard, reporting theft in progress. My voice shook, but I gave them my address, and they promised to respond immediately. By the time I got to the dock, they had managed to start the engine. My boat roared to life, and they were laughing as they tried to steer away. I shouted, "Hey, that's my boat," but they ignored me, waving like they were mocking me. I stood there drenched, my fists clenched, watching as they disappeared into the darkness of the lake. Minutes felt like hours, but then I heard the distant roar of Coast Guard vessels approaching. They sped across the water, lights flashing, cutting through the storm like heroes. I could barely breathe as I watched them chase down my boat. The sisters tried to outrun them, but they had no idea what they were doing. Their panic was clear even from a distance. The Coast Guard closed in, surrounding them. The sight was both terrifying and satisfying. And then the radio on my dock crackled and I heard an officer's voice. "Sir, we have them in custody. Stand by." The boat was coming back toward me and my heart was pounding harder than ever. But just as they reached the dock, something unexpected happened. Nancy tried to jump off the boat to escape. She slipped? I gasped as she fell into the freezing lake water, screaming. The Coast Guard reacted fast, throwing her a lifeline, but my breath was stuck in my throat. Was she going to make it? Or had this night just turned into something far worse? The next chapter continues with what happened after NY's fall into the lake. And trust me, you won't believe how things spiraled from there. Nice scream cut through the storm as she splashed violently in the freezing water. The waves were choppy, and the rain hammered down so hard I could barely see. For a split second, my heart twisted with fear, not because I cared much for her after everything she had done, but because no one deserves to drown like that. The Coast Guard reacted quickly, tossing a life buoy and hauling her back onto the boat. She was coughing, trembling, and screaming at the officers, blaming everyone but herself. Linda was shouting, too, "This is your fault. You scared her." She pointed at me from the deck as if I was the one who pushed her into the water. The officers shut her down instantly, telling her to stay quiet and cooperate. The storm finally eased, and the Coast Guard boats brought them both back to the dock, soaking wet and shivering. They looked nothing like the proud, arrogant HOA board members they pretended to be. At that moment, they were just as scared women who realized they were in big trouble. "Sir, we've secured your property," one of the officers said as he handed me my boat keys. "We'll need you to come down tomorrow to give a full statement." I nodded, thanking them sincerely. My boat was safe, but the damage was already done. The locks were broken, the engine was stressed, and my trust in my neighbors was gone. The Coast Guard led the sisters away, their wrists cuffed. Linda shouted over her shoulder, "You'll regret this." "Everyone will side with us," her voice cracked, betraying the fear underneath her anger. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the window, staring at the lake, my mind swirling. Why would they risk everything for a quick ride? Was it just jealousy or something deeper? The next morning, the news had already spread. Some neighbors came by to ask questions, whispering about what had happened. Others avoided me altogether, probably because they were friends with the sisters. I tried to stay calm and kind even to those who judged me, because I believed in handling things with grace. Later that day, the HOA president called me, demanding to know why I had involved the Coast Guard instead of resolving things neighbor to neighbor. I told her firmly, because theft is theft. "This isn't an HOA matter, it's criminal." She hung up on me. For a few days, things were strangely quiet. The sisters were out on bail, and they avoided me. But I could feel their hatred brewing. They started leaving little gifts on my driveway, trash bags, broken branches, even a dead fish once. I knew it was them, but I didn't have proof. I stayed patient, keeping my head high. I reminded myself of something my father used to say: kindness is not weakness, but never let anyone mistake it for permission to hurt you. Just as I thought things were calming down, I noticed something strange. One evening, while I was cleaning my boathouse, I saw footprints in the wet sand, fresh ones leading to my dock. My gut clenched. I turned quickly and saw movement near the bushes. Someone was there, watching me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped closer, but whoever it was ran off before I could catch them. My heart pounded as I scanned the area. Was it Linda, Nancy, or someone they sent that night? I double-checked all my locks and set up cameras around the property. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. A few nights later, under the cover of darkness, I woke to the sound of my alarm blaring again. My cameras showed the figures sneaking onto my dock, this time with something in their hands. They weren't just trying to steal, they were trying to sabotage my boats. The next chapter continues with how I caught them red-handed during the sabotage attempt. And trust me, this was only the beginning of a storm they didn't see coming. The blaring alarm ripped through the still night, jolting me out of bed. My cameras showed the hooded figures crouched by my dock, working quickly with something metallic in their hands. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a simple theft this time. They were tampering with the engines of my boats. Grabbing my phone, I called the sheriff's office, then slipped on my jacket and boots. I moved silently, keeping the lights off as I crept toward the dock with a flashlight in one hand and my phone recording in the other. The figures whispered to each other. I could recognize those voices anywhere. Linda and Nancy. Nancy hissed, "Hurry up. If we cut these fuel lines, he won't be able to use his precious toys ever again." Linda snickered. "Serves him right for embarrassing us." My blood boiled. They weren't just reckless. They were dangerous. Sabotaging a boat could lead to accidents, fires, even death if someone unknowingly took it out later. I stayed hidden behind a tree, recording every second while my heart pounded in my ears. Just then, my motion lights flicked on, flooding the dock with brightness. The sisters froze like deer caught in headlights. Linda dropped the bolt cutters in her hands while Nancy spun around, her hood falling back. "You've lost your mind," I shouted, stepping into the light. "Do you realize how dangerous this is?" Nancy gasped. "Mark, we were just saving me the trouble," I snapped, because that's what it looks like. Criminal sabotage. Before they could run, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. The sheriff's deputies had arrived faster than I expected. The sisters panicked, bolting toward the bushes, but the officers cut them off, tackling Linda to the ground while Nancy screamed. They were handcuffed on the spot, their protests filling the night. "This is harassment." Were the victims, Linda yelled as they dragged her to the patrol car. The deputies took my statement, reviewed the footage, and told me this would add to the growing list of charges against them. I felt relief, but also a strange sadness. How could people sink so low just because of envy? The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some praised me for standing my ground. Others whispered that I was making things worse, but I stayed firm. I had done the right thing, and I wouldn't let anyone twist that. For a few weeks, the sisters were quiet again. They avoided me, and I almost thought maybe they had learned their lesson. Life returned to a peaceful routine. I spent time fishing, maintaining my boats, and even helping a few neighbors with small repairs. Kindness always found its way back to me. But one afternoon, as I returned from the store, I saw something chilling. My boathouse door was wide open. I froze, dropping my grocery bag, and rushed inside. The place was ransacked. Tools scattered, ropes cut, fuel cans tipped over, and worse, my smaller fishing boat was gone. My chest tightened. They had done it again. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my phone and called the Coast Guard. "It's happening again," I said, my voice shaking. "They stole my boat, And this time, they won't get away. The officer on the other end responded, "We're dispatching units now. Keep eyes on them if you can, but stay safe." I jumped into my second boat, the engine roaring to life. I followed their trail across the lake, my teeth clenched and adrenaline surging. The sisters were ahead, laughing as they sped recklessly, leaving a foamy wake behind them. They didn't see me yet, but just as I was closing in, Nancy turned, spotted me, and screamed, "He's coming faster." They gunned the engine, the boat bouncing dangerously over the waves. Then, out of nowhere, a larger wake hit them from the side. Their boat swerved, tilted, and almost flipped. I gasped, gripping my steering wheel tight. They were seconds away from capsizing. And then, like clockwork, I heard the thunderous roar of Coast Guard boats approaching fast from behind me. The sisters didn't know it yet, but they were heading straight into another trap. One they couldn't escape this time. The next chapter continues with the Coast Guard's high-speed chase across the lake, where everything spirals into chaos, and the sisters make one last desperate move that shocks everyone. The wind whipped against my face as I pushed my boat harder, the engine screaming while I raced across the lake. The sisters were ahead of me, zigzagging wildly, trying to lose me. Their stolen boat roared over the waves, sending water spraying high into the air. I clenched my jaw, my eyes locked on them. They weren't going to get away this time. Suddenly, I heard it, the deep, commanding roar of multiple engines cutting through the night. I looked back and saw two Coast Guard vessels speeding toward us like predators, their lights flashing across the water. My chest swelled with relief. Help was here and the sisters had nowhere to hide. The Coast Guard hailed them over the loudspeaker. "You are operating a stolen vessel. Cut your engine and prepare to be boarded." But instead of stopping, Linda screamed, "Go, go faster." Their boat surged ahead, bouncing dangerously as it hit the waves. They were panicking, their movements frantic. Nancy clutched the wheel with white knuckles while Linda tried to throw objects, ropes, buckets, even a small cooler into the water behind them as if that could slow down the pursuers. The Coast Guard wasn't playing around. One vessel flanked them on the left, another cutting off their right. I stayed behind, recording the entire scene on my phone. My hands were shaking, but I knew this was the proof that would finally bury them legally. Over the loudspeaker again, the command was clear. "Cut the engine, or we will disable your vessel." Instead of obeying, Nancy shouted, "We're not stopping. He set us up. This is our lake, too." Her voice was shrill, almost drowned by the roaring engine. Linda yelled, "Hit the rocks." "They can't follow us there." My eyes widened. The rocks. They were steering straight toward a shallow, rocky area where even skilled bores avoided. One wrong move and the hole would tear open like paper. The Coast Guard gave one final warning, but the sisters ignored it. Their boat careened toward the rocks, water spraying high as they pushed the throttle to its limit. I shouted into the night, "Stop! You're going to kill yourselves." But they didn't listen. The Coast Guard executed a maneuver so fast it stunned me. One vessel surged ahead, cutting off the sisters' path, while the other moved in close from behind, creating a wake that forced their boat to slow. With precise aim, an officer fired a disabling round into the engine, and the roar of the boat died instantly. The sisters screamed as their vessel lost power and drifted dangerously close to the rocks. Before disaster could strike, the Coast Guard secured them with ropes and boarded the boat. The sisters were yanked to their feet, handcuffed, and shouted at to remain still. Their defiance crumbled under the harsh lights and the commanding voices of the officers. Nancy sobbed, "We were just borrowing it. Why are you treating us like criminals?" The officer replied coldly, "Because you are criminals. This isn't borrowing. This is grand theft." I arrived moments later, heart pounding, recording every second. Linda glared at me with eyes full of venom. "You'll pay for this, Mark. You'll see." I said nothing. I just stood there, the spray of the lake hitting my face, feeling both victorious and strangely heavy. I didn't enjoy seeing them broken like this, but they had crossed every line possible. The Coast Guard towed their boat back to shore, and I followed. When we docked, they were escorted to patrol cars waiting on land. The officers took my statement again, reviewing the footage from my phone. "You've done everything right, sir," one said. "This evidence is strong. They won't walk away from this easily." That night, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. Lights flicked on in windows as people watched the sisters being taken away. Some neighbors clapped quietly, others just stared. The HOA president didn't even come outside. As the Coast Guard left, one officer gave me a firm handshake. "You handled this well. Stay vigilant. People like that don't always give up so easily." His words stuck with me. For the next week, peace returned to my life. I fixed my locks, reinforced my boathouse, and spent time enjoying the lake again. Friends came over, and for the first time in a while, I laughed without worrying. I even spoke to some neighbors who had once been distant. They admitted they were afraid of the sisters, too. It felt like a weight had lifted. But peace never lasts long when envy still burns in the hearts of others. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on my porch watching the water glow orange. That's when I noticed something strange. A small boat slowly drifting near my dock. At first, I thought it was just a fisherman, but as it came closer, I saw it wasn't moving under power. It was drifting because it had been cut loose. I stood up, my stomach twisting. Then I saw it. Paint sprayed across the side of the boat in big angry letters. "Rat." My blood ran cold. They were out on bail, and they had found a new way to send me a message. I grabbed my phone to call the sheriff, but before I could, my boathouse alarm went off again. I turned and my heart stopped. A figure in a hoodie was standing at my boathouse door with a can of gasoline. The next chapter continues with how I confronted the arson attempt that nearly destroyed everything I owned, and the shocking twist that followed when I realized someone else might be helping them. The sharp smell of gasoline hit me like a punch to the chest as I sprinted down the porch steps. The hooded figure was already splashing fuel along the side of my boathouse, moving fast, as if they knew they only had seconds before I caught on. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself shout, "Hey, stop right there." The figure froze for a split second, then bolted toward the back of the dock. I didn't even think. I ran after them, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. They leapt over the fence like a shadow, vanishing into the trees, leaving the gasoline can rolling on the ground. I coughed from the fumes and grabbed my phone with shaky hands. "This is Mark," I told the 911 operator, my voice. "They just tried to burn down my boathouse. You need to send units now and fast." Within minutes, the sheriff's deputies arrived. They examined the scene, the gasoline trails, and the security camera that I had installed after the last sabotage. I prayed silently that the camera had captured the intruder's face. When they checked the footage, my jaw clenched. The hood fell back briefly in the video. It was Nancy. The deputies nodded grimly. "We'll issue a warrant. This has gone from theft to attempted arson. This is serious, sir." I felt a mix of anger and sadness. They were spiraling out of control, dragging themselves deeper into crimes that could ruin their lives forever. Still, I wasn't going to let them destroy what I had worked for. The deputies stayed until the gasoline was safely cleaned and the area secured. Before they left, one of them said, "You need to be careful. People like this, when they feel cornered, they get desperate." That night, sleep didn't come. Every creak of the house made me jump. I kept replaying the chase in my head, the smell of gasoline, the look of hatred on NY's face when she turned back for a second before running away. The next day, I tried to carry on as normal. I fixed the damage, repainted the boathouse, and reinforced my security even more. I wanted to believe this was the last of it. But then something unexpected happened. I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrolled in angry handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with words that made my blood run cold. This isn't over. You think you're safe because of your boats. Watch your back. I showed the letter to the sheriff's department. They added it to the growing pile of evidence. They reassured me the sisters' bail conditions forbade them from coming near my property, but we both knew they weren't following the rules. The neighborhood was divided. Some neighbors avoided me out of fear of being dragged into the drama. Others supported me quietly, dropping by to check on me. Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman from 2 houses down, said, "You're doing the right thing. Mark, they've bullied this neighborhood for too long." Her words gave me strength. For the next few days, I stayed alert. I even started keeping my dog Max outside with me during the evenings for extra security. The sisters were quiet, which was almost scarier than when they were active. It felt like the calm before the storm. And then one night, that storm arrived. I was sitting on the porch sipping tea when I heard the sound of an engine running hard across the lake. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the water. My stomach dropped. 2 jet skis were tearing through the lake, weaving dangerously close to my dock. As they came closer, I recognized them. The sisters. They screamed insults as they sped past, splashing water high onto my dock. Linda yelled, "You can't stop us. This is our lake, too." Nancy added, "Hope you can swim when this is over." Their laughter echoed in the night. I pulled out my phone, dialing the Coast Guard again. "They're back," I said, my voice steady but filled with rage. "And this time, they're not hiding anything." The officer's voice was calm. "Units are on the way. Keep eyes on them, but don't engage." But it was too late. One of the jet skis suddenly turned sharply toward my dock. At first, I thought it was a bluff, but then it accelerated, aiming straight for my boathouse. I shouted, "No, stop!" As I ran down to the dock, the engine screamed louder. They weren't stopping. Then, in a split second of madness, the jet ski smashed into the side of my boathouse with a deafening crash, splintering wood and throwing Nancy into the water. Linda screamed from the other ski, circling wildly. My hands trembled as I reached for the life ring, but the Coast Guard boats were already appearing on the horizon, their lights flashing like beacons of justice. NY's head popped up, coughing and gasping. Linda tried to pull her onto the other jet ski, but the officers closed in fast. The Coast Guard siren cut through the chaos. "Stop immediately," hands where we can see them. The sisters froze, caught in the bright beams of the patrol lights, but before the officers could grab them, Linda made a shocking move. She revved her jet ski and bolted straight toward open water, dragging her struggling sister behind her. The next chapter continues, with the most dangerous pursuit yet. A night chase across the lake where the sisters risk everything and a hidden truth about their plan comes to light. The night air was electric with tension as Linda's jet ski tore across the lake, the engine howling like a beast, spray shot high into the moonlight while she dragged Nancy half-conscious across the rough water. The Coast Guard vessels roared after them, their spotlights locking on like hunters chasing prey. I stood on my dock, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. This was no longer just recklessness. This was a death wish. "Linda, stop. You're going to kill her." I shouted into the night, but my voice was drowned by the engines. The Coast Guard shouted orders over the loudspeaker. "Cut your engine now. You are endangering lives." But Linda didn't listen. Instead, she veered sharply toward the far side of the lake where jagged cliffs loomed over dark water. My chest tightened. She was heading for the old quarry section, a place locals avoided because of hidden rocks just beneath the surface. One wrong turn and she'd crash hard. The Coast Guard split into 2 boats, one cutting off her left while the other moved in from the rear. The chase was a dance of power and precision. Linda zigzagged desperately, trying to outmaneuver them. Nancy hung on weakly, coughing and screaming, "Stop! Linda, stop!" But Linda shouted back, "Not until he pays. Not until he loses everything, like we did." Her words struck me like lightning. Lose everything? What were they talking about? I had never taken anything from them. Was this all in their heads? Or was there something I didn't know? The Coast Guard wasn't holding back anymore. One of the officers leaned out with a launcher and fired a disabling round at the jet ski. It hit the engine with a loud pop and sparks flew. The jet ski sputtered, slowing down as smoke poured from the back. Linda screamed in rage, yanking Nancy off and into the water just as the jet ski died. They both thrashed in the waves, fighting to stay afloat. The Coast Guard swooped in, throwing lifelines. They dragged the sisters onto the deck, cuffing them while they kicked and shouted, "You can't do this. You don't understand." Linda cried as they pinned her down. "He ruined our family." But her words were drowned by the chaos around her. As they were hauled back toward shore, I followed slowly in my boat, my mind racing. What did she mean? I had never had any dealings with them beyond the HOA drama. Their hatred seemed so personal, so deep. When we docked, the sisters were shoved into patrol cars, screaming about revenge, betrayal, and secrets I couldn't understand. The officers thanked me again for my cooperation. "They'll face multiple charges now," one said. "Attempted arson, theft, destruction of property, reckless endangerment. You name it, you've done everything right." But as the sirens faded into the distance, I couldn't shake Linda's words. He ruined our family. The next morning, I decided to dig. I went through old HOA records, local news articles, and even asked around quietly. What I found shocked me. Years ago, before I moved here, the sister's father had owned several rental cabins around the lake, but he lost everything after a series of bad business deals and legal battles. One of those battles was with the man who sold me my lake cabin. According to rumors, the sisters believed I had somehow profited from their father's downfall by buying the cabin cheaply. So, that was it. They thought I had taken what was theirs. Their hatred wasn't just about boats, it was about revenge for something that had nothing to do with me. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a strange mix of pity and anger. They had destroyed their own lives chasing a ghost of the past. But just as I thought the nightmare was finally ending, a deputy knocked on my door a few days later. "Mark, we've got a problem," he said, his face grim. "The sisters made bail again. And this time, they're not alone." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, not alone?" he sighed. "Their older brother. He's back in town and he's not happy." That night, as I sat on my porch staring at the lake, I felt eyes watching me from the shadows. The wind carried whispers through the trees and Max, my dog, growled low, his fur standing on end. Somewhere out there, the sisters were plotting, and now they had help. The next chapter continues with how the sisters, joined by their brother, launch a terrifying plan that puts not just my property, but my life in real danger, and the Coast Guard prepares for the ultimate showdown. The lake was still that night, but the stillness wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I sat on my porch with Max by my side, my hand resting on his head as he growled softly into the darkness. My instincts told me something was coming. The next day, the sheriff's deputy called. "Mark, you need to stay on high alert. The sister's brother, Greg, has a history of violence. He's been in and out of trouble for years. We believe he's helping them." That name alone sent a chill through me. Greg was infamous in the area, a man with a temper and a record to prove it. If he was now involved, this wasn't just about boats anymore. It was about intimidation and maybe worse. That evening, as the sun sank low, I walked down to my dock to check the boats. I made sure every lock was secured and every camera was working. While I was crouched adjusting a padlock, I heard a twig snap behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there, only the rustling of leaves. Still, I didn't like it. Later, that night, my security camera notifications lit up my phone. Heart pounding. I opened the live feed. The screen showed 3 figures creeping around my property. To smaller ones I instantly recognized as Linda and Nancy, and one larger figure, moving with quiet precision, Greg. My breath caught. They were armed with crowbars and something that looked like a gas container. My pulse raced as I called 911, whispering to the operator while watching the feed. "They're here," I said. "They're trying to break into my boathouse again." The operator assured me deputies and Coast Guard patrols were being dispatched. "Stay inside. Sir, lock your doors. Do not confront them." But I couldn't just sit there while they destroyed everything I owned. I grabbed my flashlight and stood by the door, ready to scare them off if they came close to the house. Through the window, I watched Greg force open my boathouse door. They dragged out ropes, fuel, and tools, whispering to each other. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. Max barked furiously, his deep growl echoing through the night. Greg turned toward the house, his face twisted with anger. "Shut that dog up before I do," he shouted into the darkness. I flicked on my porch lights, the sudden brightness startling them. "I've already called the police," I yelled, trying to sound stronger than I felt. Linda laughed, a high-pitched, unhinged sound. "You think that scares us now? You're the thief. You took everything from us. Tonight, we take it back." They doused my dock with gasoline. My stomach lurched. This was it. They were going to burn it all, but then the night exploded with sirens. Red and blue lights flashed across the trees, and Coast Guard boats roared across the lake toward my property while sheriff cruisers tore up the road behind my house. The siblings panicked. Greg shouted, "Run!" as the sisters scattered, but the deputies were already on them. Officers flooded the yard, shouting commands, guns drawn. Linda tripped and fell, screaming as deputies cuffed her. Nancy tried to hide behind the boathouse, but a flashlight beam pinned her down. Greg made it to the water, trying to steal one of the jet skis, but the Coast Guard cut him off with blinding spotlights and a wall of boats. "Freeze. Hands up now." An officer barked. Greg raised his hands slowly, glaring at me with a look that promised this wasn't over, but the Coast Guard wasn't playing games. They tackled him to the ground, wrestled the gas container away, and cuffed him hard. The chaos slowly settled as they were all dragged to the waiting patrol cars. Linda screamed curses at me. Nancy sobbed and Greg stayed silent, his stare burning through me. One of the deputies approached me. "Mark, they're done. They'll be facing arson, conspiracy, and multiple other charges. They won't be getting out this time." I finally let out a breath I'd been holding for days. Relief washed over me, mixed with exhaustion. The Coast Guard commander walked up, clapping me on the shoulder. "You stood strong, sir. Not many people could handle what you've been through. But it's over now. They're going away for a long time." As the patrol cars disappeared into the night, taking the siblings with them, I stood on my dock, staring out at the water that had once brought me peace. Slowly, that peace began to return. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet, truly quiet. Neighbors came by shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up against the terror that had plagued our community. Even the HOA president came by offering an awkward apology. Weeks passed. The legal case wrapped up quickly with the overwhelming evidence, the videos, the eyewitness accounts, the Coast Guard reports. The siblings were sentenced to prison, finally paying for their crimes. Life at my lake cabin returned to normal. The water was calm again, the sunsets beautiful, and the laughter of friends and family replaced the fear that had once filled the air. I learned something important through it all. Kindness is powerful, but so is standing your ground. People may try to break you, but with courage, support, and the truth, you can come out stronger. And to anyone watching or listening to this story, remember, never let fear silence you when you're standing up for what's right. Where are you watching from? Let me know, because your stories matter, too.